Hello everyone, welcome to the first part of the NgRx tutorials. So in this we'll be actually seeing and understanding what NgRx is all about, where is NgRx basically used, what is state management, what it signifies, and we'll also see how to use NgRx in an Angular application, what are some of its benefits, and we'll also see the overall NgRx architecture, how the data flows between an action, reducer, effect, and how the selectors come into the picture, right? We'll also see, when do we actually use NgRx in an Angular application? When is it actually helpful? And is it helpful in all Angular apps, or is it helpful in specific Angular apps? All right, so let's get started on that. But before we dive deep into NgRx and its syntax, I'll just like to give a brief about the application in hand. So we have a simple CRUD application wherein we have an employee list, and in the employee list we see all the details of the employee, starting from the first name, last name, email, the department and target. Okay, and the current status, whether the employee is an active or an inactive employee. Okay, also we have an addition here wherein you can click on add and fill in all the additional details of an employee to be added. Okay, so once you click on save button, it gets saved to the existing table, and you also can edit certain fields like the department and target here with using this drop down and using this text box. But let's say if you want to edit the first name, last name, or probably the email, you can make use of this edit button, which will probably redirect you to some other page. That's the edit contact page, and you can actually change the name from Ketan to Prasad. Okay, so that's where edit comes into the picture, and the last part is we already saw add, update, and delete, right? So reading is just reading it from the table, and deleting is just click on delete button and click OK. So that particular row gets deleted, right? Okay, all right. So now let's understand NgRx now. Now that we have a base of what the Angular application does. So before we dive deep into the NgRx syntax, I would just like to give a brief about what state management is and how we actually manage our state in a non NgRx application. So in a non-NgRx application, what we usually use is something called as behavioral subjects. So we define a behavioral subject in a service, and we actually inject this service in both the components, and in one of the components we actually subscribe to the subject, and in the other component we actually pass around data, right? So that is how data is passed between two components. But let's say whenever we use NgRx, what happens is, instead of using behavioral subjects which actually stores our data, what we would be doing is we would be having a Redux store in place, which would be storing all our data which is present in our application. So in the current application, if you see, there's a lot of data here which is present, like the employee list, it's details like the department, target, and we also have a filter here wherein if I type in something, it actually filters out based on whatever I have typed. Okay, so yeah, so all this belongs to a state of a particular application, and all this information will be stored in the Redux store going ahead. So let's get started on that. All right. Before we get started, I'll give a link of this project which does not currently have NgRx in the description. So if you are coding in parallel, then you can clone the code and code with me in parallel. All right. So let's get started on the NgRx part. So we first need to install something called as NgRx store. So instead of doing npm install, we are doing ng add so that it automatically updates the module. So we are using something called as schematics here. Okay, so this is done. Now if you can see, it has actually updated our app module.ts, and it has updated the package.json probably to include NgRx store in the package. And now let's see what has gotten updated. And it was also installed it via npm. So if I go to our project, if I go to package.json, right, so if I just search for at NgRx store, so it has installed the NgRx store here. Okay, and if I go now to app.module, so it has added something called as a store module. Okay, now we'll be changing, so this would be the current state, which probably I'll come to later, but then we'll be changing this later on after adding a few more, npm packages. Okay, so now let's go back and add something called as NgRx store devtools. All right. Okay, so this is done now. So now what we'll do is we'll just run ngserve and just see how our Angular app behaves. So we have configured NgRx successfully. One small thing before getting started, we need to install the Redux extension. Okay, so you need to go here, install Redux DevTools, and in my machine it's already installed, so you can install it on your machine. And once that is done, and once our ngserve runs, we can actually see how our Angular app behaves. Okay, so now this is running. Let me refresh the screen. Now if I'll have to open inspect, I'll have to go to the Redux extension. You will see it in your developer tools, and if you don't see it, just try reinstalling the Redux DevTools. Redux, I mean, we install Redux DevTools so that we understand the current state of the application. And whatever data we have in our application, it needs to go into the current state. Okay, so as of now we have nothing in the state. So if I just show you the raw view, so it just has a blank object, but going ahead we'll be storing the whole employees array here, and we can store different other values like the search by filter. Whatever I type in the search by filter, that can also be stored in the state. We can, all the manipulation wherein we were deleting a particular employee or editing a particular employee, previously it used to happen inside the component or inside the service. Now we'll move away from that logic, and we'll actually implement all this using the Redux pattern. Okay, so in the next video what we'll see is, before we actually move on to the NgRx syntax, I'll just give you a brief overview of the NgRx architecture as to how the data flows from an action, how do we actually dispatch an action, how the data actually reaches the store, and how can we fetch data from the existing store. So when I say store, this is the Redux store, and currently nothing is there in the store, right? So after we have something in the store, we need to fetch the data from the store, right? So we have something called as selectors, which we'll see later on. All right, so for now we can end this video here and continue talking about the overall architecture in the next video. All right, okay, right, thank you.